seminary is not necessarily giving me the answer. The seminary is broadening the question, and it's challenging me to examine the question and to look at things differently, as opposed to simply giving me the answer. And I think that is so crucial to ministry.
Blessings to you in the name of Jesus Christ. This is Pastors for Pastors, the podcast that supports and celebrates pastors, especially in these difficult times. I'm your host, Ken Broman-Folks, and I'm so excited to share this episode with you. I'm releasing it early. We begin a series of programs today on the stages of ministry, what it's like to be a pastor, from seminary to retirement and after. Over the next half dozen episodes, we'll be talking with pastors from each decade of ministry, and today we're talking with two seminarians and one recent graduate of seminary. Let me introduce them to you in the order you'll see or hear them. Lindsay Odom is a student at Union Presbyterian Seminary in Charlotte, North Carolina, as well as the Director of Youth and Missions Ministries at the Easley Presbyterian Church in Easley, South Carolina. Blake Tickle graduated from Wake Forest School of Divinity last May and is in the midst of a year-long clinical pastoral ministry fellowship at Wake Forest Baptist Medical Center in Winston-Salem, North Carolina. He'll tell you more about this amazing ministry. And finally, Steve Marks is a second career seminary student at Union Presbyterian Seminary in Charlotte. Steve lives in Boone, North Carolina, where he serves as a pastoral associate at the First Presbyterian Church there in Boone. These three folks are so impressive in their lives and in their ministries and in their insights into the church and the world in this challenging pandemic period that I'll say no more and let us get right into the conversation. Thank you for joining me for this conversation about seminary and what it's like to be a seminarian these days. Tell us where you are in seminary, both in terms of the seminary itself and what year, or have you graduated? Where are you in that ordination preparation process?
My name is Lindsay Odom, and I just recently started seminary. I'm in my second year of seminary, second semester at Union Presbyterian Seminary in Charlotte, North Carolina, and currently in the ordination process. I am just an inquirer, but I'm hoping to become in the candidacy phase of things after I take my Bible content exam this coming February.
You have been doing church work for quite a while, though, right?
Yes, I am. So the Union Presbyterian Seminary in Charlotte allows you to work full-time and also attend seminary. So I am working full-time as a Director of Youth and Missions at Easley Presbyterian Church and also attending seminary part-time.
Yeah, so my name is Blake Tickle. I'm a recent graduate of the Wake Forest University School of Divinity, graduated in May of 2020. So it's been roughly 6-7 months out of the gate now, and very proud graduate, very proud of my education there, and have since moved since August into clinical pastoral education residency at Wake Forest Baptist Medical Center. So that program lasts from August to August. I'm in a cohort of 8 first-year residents and joined by 2 fellows. And so I am one of 8 and navigating chaplaincy and CPE through a global pandemic.
Talk about that. What in the world is that like to try to do a clinical pastoral education unit when everything else is going on that's happening?
Yeah, so none of us could have predicted a little over a year ago, just before Christmas of 2019, when we interviewed for the CPE residency, that we would be beginning that residency in the middle of a global pandemic. And so getting that news that I had been accepted into that residency even as early as February, I was not aware of what we were going to be getting into. But I tell you what, it's been a journey. It's been an adventure. I thank God each day for my cohort. They have just been wonderfully supportive. We have sort of supported and guided each other through this pandemic as best we can. It's required a great deal of effort and support and prayers on our part that I think aren't normally a part of a chaplain's job, stepping in lots of cases and instances for family and friends who aren't able to make it and aren't able to visit those who are reaching the end of their life in the hospital. And so we have served sort of more in a family and friends sort of role as opposed to hospital chaplain. We've also been able to utilize technology in our curriculum as well as with our patient contact and getting folks in contact with their family and friends using iPads and telephones and FaceTime. Technology has just been a wonderful resource and has been on our side thus far in getting families connected with patients.
That's just incredible. I cannot even imagine, and my hat is off to you for the ministry that you're doing there. I know that it's meaning a great deal to not only patients, but as you said, friends and family who cannot be with their loved ones, and a lot of times at end of life situations. What was that like as you look back on your time in seminary?
Yeah, hectic and chaotic are words that both come to mind. So in addition to working through the ordination process, I've also served as a music director of Fellowship Presbyterian at PCUSA Church on New Garden Road in Greensboro, a position that I've held in a couple of different forms since the fall of 2013 when I graduated my undergrad. And so maintaining that job as well as doing work study and keeping up with studies and navigating through exams and thinking about what was next after graduation certainly kept the plate spinning. And all I can say is my prayers, the prayers of my mother, all my family members sustain me. And give God thanks for the sustained energy and the ability to somehow pull it off. I am so grateful to the congregation at Fellowship. They have supported me through it all, through seminary, through the ordination process, and now through this CPE residency. They have been a wonderful support system. They've been flexible with me. And understanding when schedules conflicted. So I have to give them credit and give them thanks for their ability to sort of work with me and pray with me and support me through the process and guide me. So family and friends, just the support of those whom I love.
Steve, how about you?
I am right behind Lindsay. I'm a first-year student. In my third semester, I got a little bit of a head start on my cohort, but I'm also at Union Presbyterian Seminary, and I was able to visit the campus and had a wonderful experience there before COVID, and now I'm in part of the online learning piece, which has been interesting. I kind of enjoy it because it cuts out about 5 hours of travel time on Saturdays for me. I'm serving a church. I'm the what is called the pastoral associate at First Presbyterian Church here in Boone in a part-time capacity at about 25 hours a week. And then I also serve as an on-call chaplain at the Watauga Medical Center here in Boone.
Steve, I'll pick on you a little bit. I noticed that there's a little bit of gray in the beard and the hair. So I'm guessing that you're probably not 24, but I'm wondering if this might be a mid-career change or a second career or...
Ken, I am not 24, and I'd love to be able to tell you I'm 42, but I'm not there either. I'm well past that. And this is, in fact, sort of a second career. So I spent 35 years in public safety, riding fire trucks and ambulances and managing disasters, most of which was done in Greensboro and Guilford County, before I took an early retirement and moved up here with my wife and my children. And prior to relocating, I had become very involved in the youth program, both at Fellowship Presbyterian and at Westminster Presbyterian, had been thinking about sort of shifting into a ministerial type career. But when I moved here, that's when God really sort of touched me and said, Steve, this is where I need you. I don't need you dragging hoses through fires anymore. I need you on the other side of crisis management. And so it's been an interesting journey for the last 10 years in ministry, especially as an older student and someone coming into the career with a previous career, but it's been very rewarding. And it does cause a little bit of the gray. That I will attribute some of that to ministry.
I would think fighting fires might cause a little gray as well. Tell me more about that process of sensing God's call to this ministry. Tell me that story.
I have in part my wife to blame. When we were at Fellowship Presbyterian, they had been on me to join the session. And I was not churched growing up. And so I had to be baptized before I could even be put on the session. And then, of course, once I was elected to session, the pastor at the time, Greg Clark, said, where can you help serve the church? And my wife immediately spoke up and said, we'll do youth ministry. And she went to the first round of activities, and then she dropped out, and it was me from that point on.
Oh,
yes.
Okay, then you do have a legitimate reason to blame her.
I do. We kind of migrated over to Westminster, and I worked with their youth program, and Lucy Jeffries, who was the youth director there at the time, and I believe still is, twisted my arm and said, you need to go to Montreat with these kids and experience that. And so folks who have ever been to Montreat will know exactly what I'm talking about when I say it's a thin space. And if you're ever going to encounter God and God's direction, it's likely going to be there. And that was probably the one motivating factor that really caught my attention was, instead of just being an adult volunteer or a parent volunteer, maybe God has something bigger in mind for me. And that's sort of when the light bulb really illuminated for me. And then, interestingly enough, opportunities that would never have normally made themselves present suddenly began to occur. The doors began to open. And that's when I took note and felt like I need to be listening.
Lizzie, how about you?
So, I think I sensed God's call from a pretty early age. My parents went through a really difficult divorce when I was younger, and I think that significantly shaped where God was calling me to be, especially going into ministry. So, after my parents' divorce, my dad basically chose to leave my sisters and I and was not coming to get us on his visitation weekends. And at the time, it was it was really hard to go through an experience like that, but I significantly learned and grew in my faith from this experience. I think, through that experience, it allowed me to be more involved in my home church. My mom is actually one of the associate children's directors at our home church. So as you can imagine, I don't really think there was ever a Sunday that I missed growing up, hardly. I was really active in our home church, and I actually grew up in a Methodist church. And so I think I would say if I had to choose a really significant time in shaping my call, it was probably my experiences in youth ministry. It allowed me to go on numerous mission trips and become really involved in the life of the church through youth council and church council. And I served as an acolyte and did just various things in our home church growing up. And I think through all of those experiences, God was working on my life and working in me and through me to call me to youth ministry. And I really feel like this is through my time working at Easley Presbyterian, this is a perfect fit for me and right where God wants me to be right now. And I hope that, as I go through this seminary process, I can lean on God a little more to discern what it is that God has further for me down the road. So that's kind of about my call.
Can you talk a little bit more about how going through your parents' divorce affected you in terms of a sense of call or developing or maturing your faith?
Yeah, certainly. I think everyone faces really hard experiences, and my youth pastors were just so encouraging of me during that time. Oh gosh, the support that they provided. I don't know if I could have gotten through an experience like that without the support of my youth ministers and just the guidance that they provided me. So I would say that, in some ways that experience and just their mentorship and leadership really helped me see that, this is what God was calling me to do. And I wanted to be able to provide that same support to youth in their challenging phases of life. And so through my youth pastors being so encouraging of what I was going through and really helping me through the situation at the time, I ultimately saw where God was working on me and how I felt that I could make a difference in that field. And I felt like that was really where God was calling me and where my passion was intersecting. So, that's kind of how that situation worked out and how I found my calling through it.
So you both are fairly early in the seminary journey, and how is that going? How are you finding that, especially in this pandemic time when you're doing all of this virtually and not in person?
I'm quite comfortable in an online environment, and I have grown more comfortable in developing relationships virtually just by my work at the church and the fact that we can't see people like we normally could. So I think the impact on me, especially at my age, is probably less impactful that we're not face to face. But on the other side of that coin, the amount of reading and homework is nearly overwhelming. So I have so far been able to keep my head above water, but it's been touch and go a couple times. The professors are very graceful, but there's more work to do than I maybe had anticipated.
But yes, like Steve said, it's challenging and also really nice in some ways to be virtual. I certainly have enjoyed not having to go down 85 to get to Charlotte every Saturday. Being able to do it in my own house has significantly helped just in so many ways. But I think the part I probably miss most about that is the community feel and the worship. It was a great time, and I really miss that part of seminary. Another thing I miss is just being able to be with my cohort. So when I came to seminary, we were going every Saturday for almost my whole first year, and so I grew really tight with some people in my cohort that are doing similar things to what I'm doing. So there's like about probably 4 or 5 of us that are all in our 20s that are doing youth ministry or children's ministry or some type of ministry like that. And so we all grew really close. We do keep in touch through a group text, and sometimes we even FaceTime during the week or Zoom during the week, which is nice, but it's still not the same as being able to like see them and give them a hug and stuff. So I do miss the community, the aspect of seminary it's hard. It's a lot harder to do through virtual means like Zoom and stuff. I guess the workload, Steve, um, yeah, that is definitely challenging, especially with a youth ministry job that constantly keeps you on the go. Um, so I had a really hard time balancing it my first year. I would say I was drowning in some ways. You can't get it all done. It's almost nearly impossible to get it all done in one week, especially just the amount of reading. So I really had to prioritize my first year, and that was not like me at all. I'm very much a get it done, invest in my studies type of person. I take academics really seriously. So it was really hard for me to not get some of my readings done that week or not do an assignment or something like that. But it's just so hard to fit it in, especially when you're in the work field. So I definitely prioritized, and I felt like that lowered my stress levels. And that really helped me, like I said, enjoy seminary more. And I felt like it was more of a valuable learning experience for me than trying to get all the readings done.
Well, as I mentioned earlier, I grew up in a family of music, a family of folks who are devoted to the church and devoted to service and leadership. I grew up in the Salvation Army denomination until I was about 10 years old, and we traveled through various denominations, but in each of those churches, I found sort of a leadership role, whether it was behind the soundboard or in front, singing and playing piano. I can remember as a child standing up on the tree stump and preaching to the squirrels. It's sort of always felt a call to ministry, and was privileged to work after undergrad with an after-school program and a summer day camp with First Christian Church, a Disciples of Christ denomination in Winston-Salem, and was able to help with that program, which was a ministry of their church, and provide pastoral care and support to children and their families. I was fortunate to teach there for a few years before I felt the call. I had put it off long enough that I needed to go to seminary and pursue what I sensed was the calling that I had sort of run away from for a while, and so decided to take the plunge and stopped teaching and enrolled at the School of Divinity in the fall of 2017.
Where do you see yourself in 5 to 10 years? What kind of ministry do you right now feel like God's calling you to do?
Yeah, still in discernment. I think I had the expectation when I entered in the fall that I would come out 3 years later knowing exactly what I wanted to do and that the call would be clear. It has been in some ways, but has been somewhat murky in other ways. And I'm just grateful for the journey and grateful for everyone I've met and relationships and connections and lessons that I've learned along the way. And so it's been a journey.
So, like I said, I really feel like one of my passions lies in youth ministry. But I don't know if I see myself doing that um, for 5 to 10 years from now. I think, maybe I'm being called to some type of pastoral ministry for a while, but I can ultimately see myself being a professor at some point. Um, I I just really love learning and being a student. Um, and I'm very much a nerd, but Dr. Davis, who I mentioned earlier, was my Christian education professor at Presbyterian College, which is where I went for undergraduate. And she really made a significance in me kind of feeling like I'm being called to be a professor at some point. So I do feel like I want to engage in pastoral ministry at some point in my life, but maybe that's while I'm getting my doctorate degree. I have no idea. But I definitely could see myself being a professor at some point.
What about you, Steve? Where do you see yourself?
I do feel a sense of fulfillment and a sense of call in both parish ministry and in chaplaincy. But I'm very hesitant to say that I feel as though I'm preparing myself for one or the other. Yeah. I think at this stage in my life, I'm preparing myself for what God wants me to do next. I am not someone who is terribly complacent in one role. And so when you look at my resume, it reads like War and Peace. It's lengthy because I've done so many different things, but I tend to get a little bit bored sometimes if I'm doing the same thing over and over. And one of the unique things I have found working in parish ministry is, again, I might be fixing the plumbing or making the coffee or ministering to someone in crisis or preparing a sermon or teaching a class, and it's always something different almost every day. But it's filled with grace and love, and that's, again, hard to really talk about for people that have not been in that position before. So it literally rings every bell of mine.
Well, let's talk a little bit more about this thing called the pandemic. Are there ways in which the pandemic is going to change your ministry?
I think one of the biggest challenges that I have seen so far with COVID is, whether or not churches do worship virtually and how that affects people worshiping at home. And I'm not saying worshiping at home is a bad thing at all. Our church did it for months, but it worries me as to how we're going to get people back to church at some point. I think I know a lot of people in our congregation have gotten very comfortable with the option to do worship at home. And it worries me about how, if they'll ever come back to church at some point. And right now, of course, it's still not normal. Like, in our worship services, we are social distancing, masks are required. We've marked off pews. So, not every pew can be filled. So I say that to say, of course, that we're still not worshiping in a normal capacity, and we probably won't until next fall. But one of the challenges I see is churches adapting to becoming more virtual, especially with worship, and how that affects church life and just being active in worship. I think is going to be complicated.
It's going to be close to 2 years. And 2 years of attending worship online rather than in a sanctuary, to some people that's torture. I know I retired in the middle of the pandemic. I have not set foot in a church building since then, and I have not found a church family, and I dearly miss having a church family. And I can't wait for the time where I can start going to church and building relationships with people. But I also know there are a lot of people who have gotten very comfortable in their pajamas or their sweatsuits in front of the Zoom or the recorded service. And I think there are a lot of people who are concerned about how many of those folks will come back.
And I think too, a kind of an added aspect that goes into that is how do we maintain relationships with people in a virus that is so isolating, and we're having to, not be with one another, or not be in bigger groups more than like 4 or 5. It's so hard to think of creative ways to still minister to people and still foster relationships in the midst of a virus that's so separating and divisive in some ways. So that's another factor that kind of goes into what I said, but it's that worries me about maintaining church community and fellowship and how we do that.
It's quite interesting. God had prepared me for this role at this time. 25 of the years that I've been involved in public safety has been in emergency management and planning for things just like this. And so pandemic planning, it's like everything that we had talked about for a dozen years has just suddenly surfaced. And some areas are doing well with it, and others, probably the majority, are failing miserably because no one really expected something of this magnitude. And without going into great technical detail here, I am concerned that a sense of normalcy as we knew it before COVID probably will never exist again. And so that does become a challenge with the complexity of a virus and how it changes and mutates and how we adapt to that. But in the same breath, I'm very excited that this is a catalyst for us to revisit how we do ministry or how we do church. And I don't think it's any irony that we're in the midst of studying the Reformation right now, where I am in seminary. I feel like we are now, and really we're pre-COVID at the same crux of a Reformation, as we're seeing such a great division in Christianity right now from a conservative to a progressive standpoint. And for the seekers or the non-believers, that can be difficult for them to look at Christianity and say, well, he's a hypocrite or she's a hypocrite, or they can't even agree on what it is that they're preaching about. And so this is a once in a lifetime opportunity for us to really think about who we are as God's children and what we're called to do. And quite honestly, every Presbyterian church that I have attended has been beautiful, ornate, stained glass windows, nice pews, beautiful music, wonderful order of service, and inviting and comfortable, which is great. But what are we doing to fulfill Jesus' call to care for others? And so I see this now as, hey, we can't be together in the sanctuary, but we can still carry out what we're called to do. We've got to figure out a way to do that safely. But now is the time for us to reimagine and re-image what church is, not only to us, but to the people we serve. On top of that, I think people who aren't deeply ingrained in their own spiritual well-being are really struggling with this virus, about their purpose, about the purpose of the world, about a higher power. And so there is a tremendous need for pastoral care, not only for our own folks, but for many others. And so the opportunity for people in ministry, for seminarians to be able to embrace this need, I think it's tremendous.
So certainly, as we've laid out some of the challenges, the first of which is technology, which I think that the church as a whole has sort of stepped up to the plate and said, hey, if we're going to make it through this pandemic, we've got to sort of adjust. And I think it's that kind of mentality that we're going to have in the future to sort of meet the needs of the congregation. The church is going to have to meet the unique challenges of the world, things like poverty and racism and homophobia, and certainly what we've seen in just in the country within the last few months with the election of a new president. The church is going to have to be sort of the authoritative voice for justice and peace and righteousness and those sorts of things. The church, unfortunately, with my generation, and I guess a generation is 15 years, so I can say the generation behind me now, the church has been viewed by many, in fact, as a place of steep traditions in sort of a negative way, and a place of judgment and reproach and sort of full of people who are sticks in the mud. And so I think the church is being called in this time to sort of rise to the occasion, as we've done with technology, but also to look around and examine the way that we do everything else, the way we do worship and the way we dress and how we gather and who is gathered in our spaces, and the work that we do in the community, I think, is so important. I think folks my age and millennials, I will say, aren't so much focused on what a church has done in the past, but what is a church doing right now? How are they answering the call of Christ in the world right now? And what is the vision for 5 to 10 years from now? And how many folks are being fed? How many folks are being housed? I think that is our call and that is our challenge.
I agree with you in so many ways. I think it's been so challenging, like kind of like Steve said, just to for our members to know how to live as a Christian in the midst of this virus. And I don't mean that like, I mean that more like, like how do we faithfully trust, and how do we faithfully live and trust God in the midst of something that's so devastating, but also is challenging our faith in significant ways. And I think it just shows how much the church is in need, especially during a time like this. And I love what Steve said about it providing the opportunity for churches to kind of reevaluate what we're doing now and how we can be more invested, especially in a time that doesn't allow us to be, physically with each other. What can we do to still be the church in today's world in a time like COVID? So I think it does provide some valuable opportunities for sure.
For me, one helpful reframing of the question is, instead of asking myself, what does it mean to be the church in these days? The helpful question is, what does it mean to be the body of Christ in the world these days? And just using that good old phrase that comes right out of Scripture helps me to have some handles to grab hold of.
Well, Ken, to expound on that, I think you're absolutely right. Jesus did not have a church or sanctuary. He did his ministry in the world, and we have long since struggled with banners out front and nice signs and pretty web pages and flyers, you name it, to bring people into the church, where perhaps we should have been getting outside of the four walls of the church and going to meet the people where they are. And so that, I think, is perhaps going to be the greatest challenge as we navigate through COVID, is how do we meet the people where they are? Because I think that's what is needed now more than ever.
I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit just to ask how you feel that seminary is helping you in exploring these kinds of questions and preparing you for the world out.
So in terms of the routine day-to-day pastoral care and spiritual care and support, I feel very well prepared for that in terms of the education that I received at the Divinity School. I was fortunate enough to do my internship in the summer of 2019, and so to be able to sort of apply my first 2 years of seminary experience, then have the internship, and then go and to be able to speak from that experience in my third and final year was just highly transformative and deeply formative for me as well. And so to be able to sort of combine the academic and research experience as well as the practical side of things has been helpful. And to be able to come to this CPE residency and to know some familiar faces and have some continuity, to have professors and supervisors who I had known during my time in seminary was certainly helpful to have that, to sort of have that. That rapport and that continuity there. And so that's been helpful, but certainly none of us could have predicted the sort of depth and scale and length, width, and height of this pandemic. And certainly, as I mentioned before, when we applied, none of us could have known that here, almost a year later, we would still be sort of in the thick of things, in the weeds, as it were.
Yeah, I think seminary has helped me in a lot of ways. In my current job right now, I think seminary has helped apply a lot of what I'm learning, um, and it's allowed through working and through doing seminary at the same time. It's allowed me to put into practice what I've been learning at the seminary, which I think has been really helpful. Um, and I think since entering seminary, um, my notion or definition of discipleship has significantly changed, um, in what it means to live the Christian life each and every day through our words and our actions. But I just, oh my gosh, I see seminary. It's so hard for me to even answer this question because I think there's so many different ways that seminary has helped me. I think through taking Greek last semester, for instance, that has helped me a lot in biblical interpretation and given me so many tools and resources for writing lesson plans for my youth and interpreting the passage that I would not have had before. So it's little things like that that have really helped me clarify what I'm teaching on and helped me grow personally in a lot of different ways.
I would agree 100% with what Lindsay said. I think it adds more tools to our toolbox, and it makes it contextual to what we're doing in our actual work. So it's great to have that educational piece parallel to the vocational piece. Running at the same time. The one thing that I'll add that I have found in just my 3 semesters is that I'm comfortable if I ask you a question and you give me the answer, I can go with that. And what I have found is that seminary is not necessarily giving me the answer. The seminary is broadening the question, and it's challenging me to examine the question and to look at things differently, as opposed to simply giving me the answer. And I think that is so crucial to ministry. And again, I'm speaking kind of as a newbie, but there are many times that as pastors or chaplains, we can't give someone the answer. We can simply be with them. And so I think seminary helps to prepare us for those times when we can't give the answer, but we can be present with them in their suffering as well as in their joys. Well, there's an analogy I like to use, and the disclaimer here is I am a first-year seminary student, and so you can throw this out with the bathwater if you want. But when people are at odds, I like to remind them that Jesus is the light, and I think that we can all agree on that, and there's scriptural backing on that. But it doesn't say that Jesus is the white light or the green light or the blue light. It just is Jesus is the light. And when you shine that light through a prism, depending on where you are, it might be a different color. And so where Lindsay might see blue, I might see green or orange, and Ken, you might see red. We're all seeing the same light of Jesus, but we're seeing it from a different perspective. And sometimes we lose sight of that, and we make that a cause of division instead of an opportunity for us to come together.
Don't ever use the caveat that you're a first-year seminary student. That answer will carry you the rest of your ministry. Anything else at all that you would like to share?
Well, Ken, you know your podcast, Pastors4Pastors. You can you can advertise it in this way. Just being able to hear someone who has gone through what I am going through now and has made it is very encouraging. And so that's a wonderful thing to be able to share with other seminarians that find themselves on a very small life raft in a very big sea.
Well, I just want to say thank you so much. I wish that you had done this podcast 3 or 4 years ago when I was starting my seminary experience. I know it would have been tremendously helpful, but I want to commend you for doing this work. It is noble, holy, sacred work for me and for those of us who are on a journey and in a discernment process. So I just want to say thank you.
That means more than I can say. And thank you for the ministry that you are doing right now that is so important for so many people in a time that is the distance and the loneliness and the pain that people are experiencing, and that you're willing to walk with them through that is powerful, and I deeply respect you and thank you for doing that. 3 very impressive people with unquestionable calls to and giftedness for ministry. I am so awed by the fact that all 3 are serving churches while also doing seminary or chaplaincy. And how about Steve volunteering as a hospital chaplain, and Blake working with friends and family of patients with COVID who cannot receive visits? Very humbling and impressive. If these 3 are representative of our many seminary students, we have every reason to look forward to remarkable ministry in the years to come. Next time, we will sit down with pastors in their first decade of ministry to see how they are experiencing those early years of service. And thank you for your leadership of Christ's body wherever you may be. Until next time, I'm Ken Broman, folks, and this is Pastors for Pastors.